Hello, this is Mr. Reeks, and I'm going to do a little explanation of the process of mitosis, one of those really important concepts in biology that you've got to be able to talk about in exams, but it's also so important for understanding how your body repairs itself when it gets damaged or how you grow. This is all about how you make new cells. Like this diagram shows here, mitosis is all about how one cell becomes two cells. And there's a little smiley face for you. So the first thing to note is that you do have to learn about mitosis and meiosis at GCSE. And so I've got a nice way of remembering that. Just remember which way round they are by remembering that mitosis happens in my toes. Mitosis is in my toes. And basically that's my way of saying that it happens in your toes and in your entire body because whenever your cells need to make new cells, whether they're new skin cells or new muscle cells, whatever they are, mitosis is how that happens. Meiosis, which I'll do in another video, is in my ovaries. Meiosis is in my ovaries. So here, ladies. And basically, that's my way of saying that meiosis is only used for making the sex cells, so that's sperm in males or eggs in females. So we're not worrying about this. Today's video is about mitosis, as in my toes, and in the rest of your body as well. It's how your cells make more cells. So let me show you how that works. These are the objectives for this video. This is what I'm really hoping that you will know how to do by the end of this video. And so just to go through it really quickly with you, I want everybody at the end to be able to recall, that just means remember, that mitosis is cell division that produces two genetically identical cells. I'm hoping you'll also be able to describe DNA replication in some simple terms. And hopefully also outline, that just means give a few details, just some brief details about how mitosis works. So outline mitosis, give a few steps to show how it works. Basically, why are we learning about mitosis? The point of mitosis is that whenever you damage one of your body parts, then you need to repair it. So here's someone's arm, they've hurt themselves, they've cut their arm, and so now one of the things that's going to need to happen is that new skin cells are going to be made to replace some of these damaged ones. There's going to be all sorts of different cells that in this wound here, there's going to need to be new cells made to replace some of the damaged ones. And so how does that happen? Well, if we were to zoom in here, you'd have plenty of existing cells in there, all with little nucleuses in the middle. There you go. And the point is that if we've now got a gap here where there are damaged cells and there are bits of cells everywhere because maybe you cut yourself or you graze yourself and there's just carnage, just cells everywhere. The point is, these cells here are just going to be able to make new ones of themselves by a process called mitosis and just replace those damaged cells with fresh new ones that are identical copies of these ones here. And the way they're going to do that is by each one of these is going to split in two. That's what this video is all about. How do they split into two? The other reason that a cell will do mitosis is when you are growing. So when you're going from a small person to a larger person, or when you're doing any kind of growing, of course that means new cells are going to have to be made. And so it's the same process. How do your existing cells replicate themselves, double up, and form new cells that makes you grow? The first thing to say is that inside every cell, you've got chromosomes. Humans would have 46 chromosomes in there, 23 pairs, and I've just drawn a really simple cell showing 4 of those chromosomes. And notice that they might not look how you expected them to look. They're not X's at this point, because actually when a cell's doing most of the stuff that it normally does for most of the time, it actually has single-stranded chromosomes, just looking like little squiggly lines. In fact, you can't even see them under a microscope when they're doing their normal stuff. But then something happens just before the cell needs to divide. So remember, this is all about how one cell will go on and become two cells. So it's going to split, it's going to make a copy of itself. But to do that, before it even starts to split, it has to copy its DNA. And so this bit's called DNA replication. So first of all, if you zoomed in on that chromosome, you'd see a long strand of DNA, which has of course got all of the genes to make all of the different proteins in your cells, all of the genes that make you who you are all in this DNA. And what happens is that the DNA will make a new copy of itself. First of all, it will unzip. And because it unzips, that actually frees up all of these bases. In another video you can find out about the structure of DNA. If you look up the video that I did about protein synthesis, I show you what all those bases are. And basically, get it? You find that when it splits and unzips like it has here, new bases will come in that match up with the old ones, because those bases are just kind of freely floating around in your nucleus. And they'll come and join on with the existing ones on both sides of that unzipped strand. And then they'll kind of all join together like this. And effectively what you end up with is two copies of the original DNA. And all that had to happen was for it to unzip, and then new bases all join on. These little bits here I've tried to show are bases, and they join on here. And just remember, for those of you who have forgotten, the bases will be either A, or they'll be T, or they'll be C, or they'll be G. And of course that means that on the other side there'll always be the corresponding letter, so G always goes with a C, C always goes with a G, T always goes with an A always goes with a T, like that. So I'm just trying to show an example. That's how DNA makes a new copy of itself. And what that does, when all the DNA has doubled itself up like that, it started off like this, and then it ends up with two copies, and both of those copies would then, of course, go back to their original shape. So you've got then two strands of DNA, etc., etc. So you've got now two strands of DNA. Well, the way that actually works is, because each of these chromosomes is made of that DNA, that's what makes the chromosome suddenly look like an X, because actually each chromosome now has double the amount of DNA at that point. So after what we call DNA replication, you've got the same number of chromosomes as before. It's just now they look like X's, and they've actually got double the amount of DNA in there because they did the process I just showed. I'm now going to show you how mitosis works, step by step. And of course you can pause the video, you can go back and watch anything that you want again if you didn't get it the first time. But hopefully you understand why these chromosomes now look like little X's. It's actually because each one has double the normal amount of DNA, which is good, because actually we need double the amount of DNA because we want to make two cells out of one cell, and then each cell in the end will have the right amount of DNA because we've doubled it to start with. So first of all, the first step of mitosis is that all of these cells line up along the middle. They line up like this. They line up. And they actually do this. The nuclear membrane breaks down. And the reason we know this is because this is the part that you can actually see under a microscope. At this point, when the chromosomes are little X's like this, they've also condensed, and so even under a light microscope you can see these chromosomes. And we can see that the nuclear envelope breaks down. There are these things at the sides here. You don't need to know this bit. This is a detail that you don't really need to know. They're called spindle fibers. What you do need to know is that they attach to the chromosomes, and the chromosomes will now get literally ripped apart. They're going to get pulled to both sides of the cell now. But of course what that means is that actually instead of just being an X, they get pulled apart into the two separate arms of the chromosome. So those arms get pulled both ways by those basically by those spindle fibers that I mentioned. That remember, you don't need to remember the name of, but they get pulled to either side of the cell. And of course, the other thing to bear in mind is, because when I showed you earlier, remember this? How this DNA got copied, and it actually makes two identical copies. These are exactly the same as the original one here. That also means that each of these arms here is exactly the same as the other one. This one is the same as this one. This one is exactly the same as this one. It is identical. And That's really important because, of course, the next step is that this whole cell starts to kind of divide into two like this because those chromosomes have been pulled two ways. They've been pulled over here, pulled over here, and then, of course, these two bits of the cell split off from each other. A new nuclear membrane forms, so basically a new outside of the nucleus forms for each one. And remember, we had those 4 chromosomes in a nucleus, like so. And of course now each of these cells is identical to each other, but they are also identical to that original cell that started to divide. So that is how mitosis produces 2 identical, genetically identical cells, and they are identical to whatever you had at the beginning. That's really useful because if you're trying to repair some damaged skin, you don't want fancy new cells that have got new DNA. You want exactly the same cells that you already had before, please. So that means your existing skin cells, like the ones on my hand now, the existing skin cells will divide, make identical copies of themselves, and they'll replace any damaged tissue. Or in the case of if you're growing, that's that your existing cells will divide and grow into new cells that you need. So that's how mitosis works. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Once again, these were my objectives, or your objectives. You should be able to remember that mitosis is cell division. Literally means that one cell divides into 2, produces 2 genetically identical cells. You should be able to describe DNA replication. Remember when I said that was this bit? And then you should be able to outline mitosis, which was when I showed you step by step, those bits. Alright, and the only other thing to remember, don't get it confused with meiosis. Mitosis is in my toes and the rest of my body. And meiosis is in my ovaries.